whoever you are. It's nice to see a good turnout. Nice to have a good song service that has led us up to this point in time. I appreciate it very much. I've seen you brethren quite a bit lately. It hadn't been that long that I was here. And then I've seen some of you at Russellville, Arkansas, and then I saw you at Hamilton. And I see you here again. I would have thought by now you would have been tired of me. And you might would have wanted to choose a different option. But that's all right. I'll take your friendship as long as you'd like to extend it to me. And I'll try to pay you back the same way. You brethren made a decision here. I don't know how long ago, but you made a decision here to have a meeting at this particular time, and you chose to have Brother Kenny Simone come and preach for you this weekend. And then he made a decision, and the decision he made was that there was something a little more important to him than coming here. That was his daughter's birthday. Some of y'all may have thought he was copping out on you. Maybe he was being politically influenced or something and all of that. But, I don't think that's the case. I've really been impressed with that boy lately and all the things he's been saying and doing for the betterment of the brotherhood and for unity and all of that. I really, really enjoyed talking with him a lot lately and all of that. And so, it wasn't too long ago, I was on the phone with him. And I said, "Brother, I'm fixing to go down and hold a meeting that you were supposed to hold." I said, "I'm the spare tire. I'm the substitute." I said, "I wish you'd have went so I could have come and listened to you." He said, "Man, I do too." And these are his very words. He said, "Those brethren down there sure do need a shot in the arm, and I wish I could have went and got it. Give it to them. So y'all take that any way you want to. But that's what he said about you. You need a shot in the arm." I think that's just kind of an expression of his, but he was kind of sensing his regrets. And he said, "But he said, you don't have too many children in life, and my daughter's birthday was coming up that weekend." He said, "I just got to thinking about it." And I said, "Well, Kenny, it's obvious you haven't been on the preaching trail too long." I said, "There's priorities." And I said, "The way you work that probably is you have that birthday a day earlier or a day later or something like that, and you just go ahead." And I said, "Because, the church is just pretty important." And he said, "Yeah, Brother Malcolm, you're right." He said, "I am really regretting that decision." So I said, "Well, how about coming to Waco then, preaching for us?" And he said, yeah. I said, "Okay." I said, "Give me a date." I said, "You got any open dates next year?" And I thought it was so cute, really. I just tickled me. He said, "Well, Brother Malcolm, I'm wide open." He said, "I ain't got a meeting booked next year." I said, "Well, good then. Just whatever date we want, you ought to be able to fill in the blank, right?" He said, yes, sir. He said, "I'll let you know when it'll be convenient for me." He said, "I'll get back with you pretty soon." So I'm thinking that probably some of you, since you are travel friendly and you just love that traffic up 35 in Austin and all that, I'm thinking some of you will be glad to zip up our way when he does come our way, if the Lord be willing, and you can hear him up there as well. So, a lot of decisions were made that brought us to this point right here. As a matter of fact, in everything we do in life, what we have now in life, who we're married to, where we're living, what we're doing as a profession, what kind of things we're now enjoying and investing in, what kind of issues and problems we've had in life, almost every one of them, 99% at least, goes back to a decision that we made or a decision that somebody else made for us and we just accepted it. Now, I don't know the whole story of the Apostle Paul and his mother and dad. I suppose they made the decision to send him to the school that he went to be learned under the feet of Gamaliel, which apparently was the greatest professor, at least in the Jewish kingdom at that time. He seems to have about the highest reputation of all those rabbis. And Paul would later kind of boast about it, or at least inform everybody about how he was a Jew of all Jews, a Hebrew of all Hebrews, that he had been raised at the feet of that man, and he was zealous, of course, in all their works and their laws and so forth. I would suppose that probably the parents made that decision. Maybe not. Maybe Paul decided he wanted to go there to learn, and the parents then went along with that decision. But I bet it was a cooperative effort of some kind. But whatever the situation, he wound up being taught there in that Jewish school, and this made him a zealot. This made him zealous for Jewish law. As a result of that, he became very, very strict in his interpretations and in his obedience to that law, to such an extent that he even felt like it was his obligation to destroy and harm those who did not follow the same thing that he did. A lot of times we feel that way about anybody that doesn't see something the same identical way I do. They don't react the same way I do, or they don't say the same thing I say, or they don't answer the way I answer that. And we just feel like that maybe perhaps we ought to give them a paddling or something, you know, to get them to come around to our way of thinking. So Paul would invest a great portion of his life in trying to destroy the church. Whenever this new kingdom was established, the Church of Christ, there in Jerusalem, and many of his Jewish brethren began to defect from the Jewish faith, and then go over and take on the Christian faith, believing that the old law had been nailed to the cross, that a new law was now coming, and that inspiration was given to elders and apostles, and that they were being taught that law. When he saw these people going that way, he felt like they were just going against the will of God. And he would later say, and I believe he meant this with everything he had, I have lived in all good conscience before God unto this day. And he would declare that he did what he did in good conscience, believing that he was doing God's will. Well, our Bible even predicts that there may come a time, and I think it's in the not too distant future, that there may come a time when people will even kill you and think that they're doing God's service. They think that they're doing what God would want them to do by killing you because you don't line up with their political ideals or their religious tenets or whatever it is they have. They'll feel that way. That's exactly how Paul felt. That's the problem with being misguided. When you have made the wrong decision, you know, it's kind of like a road map. Road map, you know, pretty simple. Or maybe like when someone gives you directions, they say, go down the road here to the third light, turn left, and then you'll see a yellow house, turn right, and you know, hey, they make it pretty easy. You say, oh, it's just a little way. But you go down to that third light, and instead of turning left, you forget and you turn right. Well, guess what? That's what they call lost. You are now lost. And there is no telling where you're going to wind up because you took the wrong turn right there when you should have just went the other way. That's why decisions are so important. When you make a decision early in life to launch out into business, to launch out into whatever, if only you could see the end of that decision. It might fortify your desire to want to go at it even stronger, or it might turn you to want to run from that thing and never touch it again if you just realized how it was going to turn out. I'll assure you it's that way with me. If I had known in my younger years when I was so naive, so dumb, and so ignorant, isn't it odd how some of the most important decisions that we're asked to make in life are made when we don't hardly have a lick of sense? Isn't that something? After we get older, seasoned, and wisdom comes in, and we kind of know what to do about everything, don't hardly matter now. You know, we've settled down. You know, my Grandpa Niffen used to say, I finally figured out all the answers. And when I did, they changed the questions. Well, that's kind of how it goes in life, you know. You start out, and really you're just in the fall. But there's a reason why a young man will just bust his gut trying to do something that the older man won't dare to do, and that's because he just believes he can do it. The old man don't even want to go through the process. He don't even want to have to bother with all the circumstantial problems that are associated with it. So Paul made that decision to even kill Christians, to commit them to prison, to hail them toward the magistrates and so forth. And this became his specialty. As a matter of fact, he was on the road to Damascus, going down there to take more Christians into custody and to put them in prison and have them persecuted and so forth. But a phenomenal thing happened unto him that he was not expecting by any stretch of the imagination. Big old bright light shone, so bright that it put fish scales on his eyes. And he falls to the ground where he cannot even see anymore. He's blinded. And when he realizes that it is the Lord, and he calls out to him and says, "What would I have me to do?" And the Lord would send him into the town and told him to go to a certain place. And he said, "Wait there." And he would send somebody who would give him commandments as to what he should do. So Paul was down there praying, and he was trying hard to pray through. He prayed and prayed and prayed and prayed, but he never did ever pray through. He didn't get through until the man of God came to him, and that man of God said, "And now, Paul, why tarriest thou? Arise and be baptized, and wash away thy sins, calling on the name of the Lord." So it took the proper application of God's Word. It took the conforming to the plan that God had now decided. And Jesus made that plan very clear, didn't he? When he said to his apostles, "You go preach my gospel everywhere. He that believeth and is baptized shall be saved." That's the plan of salvation reading the Bible. I imagine most of y'all have TVs, and probably more than likely you got about 719 channels and all that, you know. And chances are every now and then, just for maybe entertainment purposes or just because you're bored, you may flip on there where there's about 20 or 30 religious channels. And maybe you listen to Robinson or Swaggart or Copeland or Head or whoever, you know. It doesn't make any difference who you listen to. Every one of them, after preaching a great sermon, will then say, "Now if you're out there and you're not saved, I just want you to say the sinner's prayer with me." Now you just hold your hand up right here in the audience, or if you're out there in television land or on the internet, just hold up your hand and say the sinner's prayer with me. You know, I would love to preach that, but if I did, I wouldn't be preaching you what I believe and what I believe my Bible teaches me. There's not one preacher in the Bible that ever said that. Not one apostle, not one evangelist, not one elder. As a matter of fact, the Bible don't say one word about prayer being part of the plan of salvation. Now, it's a great thing, but it's not part of the plan of salvation. The only thing the Bible really says about prayer is, when it comes to a sinner, is that God heareth not sinners. That man said, we know that. We know God heareth not sinners. And that's recorded in inspiration, right there in the Bible. When the Apostle Peter preached the first sermon that was ever preached, as far as the gospel era is concerned, 3,000 people asked him what to do to be saved, and he didn't say, just stand there and hold your hand up and say the little sinner's prayer. He said, repent and be baptized, every one of you, in the name of Jesus Christ for the remission of sins. I have a feeling that if you'll preach that still to this day, you can't be wrong. Even if there is other ways that might be okay, it can't be wrong to tell a sinner, if you'll do that, that'll make you well with God and that'll make you safe, because it worked then, and I haven't seen or heard of anything since then that's caused that thing to change. I believe if you preach that, it'll still bring the gospel plan as it ought to be, and it'll still save souls just like it did back then. So the Apostle Paul was confronted with that. He made the decision to accept that, and he became, as you well know, the greatest of all evangelists. He was the man that penned 70-something% of our New Testament that we have right here, and I just often wonder, what would we do as Christians if we extracted all of his writings? I'll tell you what, we wouldn't have a whole lot left. We'd be in the dark on so much of this. And yet this man was the greatest enemy that the church ever had. But it seems like that the zeal and the desire that he had in Judaism was just as strong in Christianity, if not stronger. And And with an indefatigable effort he would go forth and he would preach the gospel. As a matter of fact, about the first thing that he did as soon as he realized he was saved and that he was called to preach, and he was, God told Ananias, you go your way and you see that man, even though I know you're afraid of him, but you go see him, for he said, he's a chosen vessel unto me, to bear my name unto the Gentiles, and before kings of this earth. Paul got to speak to Porcius Festus, Felix, and King Agrippa, and even the great Caesar, Tiberius, Claudius, Drusus, Nero, Germanicus. He got to speak to the highest rating official on earth in the highest court in the land, and there represent the gospel of Jesus Christ. So that decision that was made there on the Damascus Road and then later down at Ananias' place, that decision is what led him to become this greatest of all Christians. And when he obeyed that gospel, one of the first decisions he made was not to confer with flesh and blood. I would to God that every Christian was that way. Folks, when you put a Bible in your hand, you've got the sword of the Spirit. You've got all power. You've got all authority. You've got permission from that book to go out and do God's will. And there's not an angel in heaven or a demon in hell can condemn you from doing that, because it is the ultimate authority. He didn't go down to the church council. He didn't deal with the synod. He didn't deal with a group of elders or bishops or archbishops or whatever. He just realized, I've been called. And he went down to southern Arabia, a remote area where nobody was dealing and nobody was working. And he just headed down there and started preaching the gospel. And then later come back and the church just gave him all kinds of flack. They didn't know what was going on. They didn't know why he was down there. In fact, a lot of the church didn't even want to accept the man. But he would carry on nonetheless. And as a result of his convictions and the decisions he kept making on a daily basis, as a result of that, he would wind up in prison more than he would wind up in the free world. You notice a lot of times as he writes, he'd say, Paul, a prisoner of Jesus Christ. I doubt that anybody in here has ever been a prisoner for Jesus. You may have been in prison, but it was probably for something foolish or something that was misunderstood or something that you brought upon yourself. But I doubt any of you have ever been a prisoner because of and for Jesus Christ. Do you realize that would be a blessing? It'd be a real blessing if they would incarcerate you because you're just too strong for Jesus. That's what the problem was. He just wouldn't hush. He just kept preaching Jesus Christ everywhere. It didn't matter if they stoned him, if they left him for dead, if they cast him out of the synagogues, if they beat him with stripes. It didn't make any difference. He just kept making the decision to go on and keep preaching the gospel of Jesus Christ. So he would wind up there in prison. And while he's sitting there in one of the prisons that he got in, the prison at Caesarea Philippi, the governor Felix really took a liking to this man. I think this is one of the most amazing scriptures in the Bible. It says that him and Felix oft communed with each other. He would seek Paul out of the prison cell and oft commune with him. They'd sit down and they'd have a cup of tea or whatever, little chow, and they'd talk and they'd chat. Paul was smart. Boy, Felix liked to pick his mind. But he got transferred. And what he did, of course, he should have done what a lot of these liberal presidents do, you know, like Obama's fixing to do, like Clinton did, and all that. He should have just let him go. Just pardon him. But you know what? When you're in politics, there's two things that rule you: the people and the almighty dollars. And so it says of Felix that he, willing to show the Jews a pleasure, left Paul bound. See, he didn't have to. It was one of Paul and it was a whole bunch of them. And all the Jews were saying, no, don't let that man out. Well, I wonder why. Well, it's obvious why they didn't want to leave that man out. You know, I heard today on the radio coming down here that ISIS is planning on trying to bomb the main states that Donald Trump is leading in. They're trying to hurt him. Pretty obvious they know who their enemy is and who their friend is, isn't it? That's all I'll say about politics right now. All right? So there was a reason why the Jews did not want Paul to be loose. Well, he'd go right into the very next synagogue, beckon with his hand, and preach Jesus unto them, and he would cause more people to leave their faith. He would cause an uproar in every city that he would go to because he had the truth, and they thought, we don't need that. So they played the card, and the politician took him, and he left him bound. Now Porcius Festus comes upon the scene, and he's in charge of Paul. And one day he did a little political move of his own. He went down to Jerusalem to politic a little bit for about a week and deal with all the governors and rulers and so forth down there. And while he was down there, the Jews hit him up and they said, hey, you got a prisoner up there that needs to come down here. Said, he's a Jewish prisoner. And we've got charges against him. You need to bring him down here so we can condemn him. One thing you got to say about Festus, he was a smart man and he knew his politics, and he said, no, we ain't going to do that. He said, that ain't right. Not according to Roman custom to do that. He said, if you want that man condemned, you come up there yourself. And you press the charges on him face to face. Church needs to hear that. If you got an issue with brother so-and-so, let's meet him face to face. Let's don't put it on Facebook. Let's don't call somebody up and say, guess what I heard? Let's don't sneak around behind his back. No, let's just do it face to face. That's just common logic, isn't it? So when he left and went up his way, here come the Jews. And they began to lay all these heavy charges upon Paul. And old Festus was smart enough to see that they didn't have a leg to stand on. He could tell that their charges, in fact it says in the Bible, they pressed all these charges against him and they could not be proven. But bear in mind, Festus is also a politician. And so when it all came down to it, Festus said, well, Paul, would you be willing to go down to Jerusalem and be tried of these matters? That's where they want you to be tried. That's where it all started. So would you want to go down there and get tried? Now Paul faces a major decision. According to King Agrippa, he probably shouldn't have made that decision. King Agrippa was of the persuasion that if he'd just held his peace and stayed there, he might have got set at liberty. Now, I don't know if Agrippa was right or not. But I know one thing, Paul had already stayed there for quite a while. And when Felix left, he didn't get set at liberty. So he was kind of going by what he already knew. And also, if anybody knew Jewish people, if anybody knew how vicious, and how ugly, and how mean that they could get, Paul knew that because he had once been one of them. I often think about that verse in the book of Psalms where King David said, I sat where they sat. Paul had sat where they sat. He'd seen the Sanhedrin council operate. He'd heard all the rabbis speak. He'd been in their synagogue. He had been in the highest echelon of all the Jewish rulers and all their customs. He knew exactly what he was getting into. And I think, as my dad used to say, he knew that if he went back to Jerusalem, that he didn't stand a Chinaman's chance, and he would be killed. So it seemed, it's kind of written between the lines here, it seemed like that he felt like he could live a little longer, maybe preach a little more, perhaps write a few more epistles, or at least just avoid the anathemas of the Jews if he would exercise his Roman citizenship, the privilege he had, and he decided, he made a decision. He said, I appeal unto Caesar. Immediately, that took the Jews out of the picture. He had that right. So Festus went over there with his little jury that he had, and they conferred for a little while, and he talked, and old Festus just cocked his face at him and said, Hast thou appealed unto Caesar? Then unto Caesar shalt thou go. So now, all that's lacking is a boat that'll touch port at Caesarea Philippi, that's destined for Rome, and a centurion that can be put in charge of Paul because he would have bonds, an old heavy ball and chain on his foot, and handcuffs on his hands, and a centurion with a sword to guard him, watch him all the way. This was all, see, government funded, you see, because of his Roman citizenship. So that's really all that's lacking right there, is for a boat to come that way so that they could make it to Rome. There Paul could be judged. Now, I didn't turn that map around, I probably should have, but there's a map of the route that they took to make it to that place. And bear in mind, the ships back then didn't have football fields built on top of them. They didn't have swimming pools and saunas and spas and 6 restaurants and casinos and all that. They were just little crafts, just little wooden crafts made by man with sails up here, and the wind pushed them, you know. And sometimes it took a whole lot longer than you thought to get from point A to point B. So we're sitting here just simply waiting for that ship. And while we're doing this, old Festus is worried about something. You see, I don't know how much you know about the Roman kingdom or not, but Rome ruled basically all the civilized world at that time. And the major emperor, of course, was Caesar. There was a succession of like 16 of them. And these Caesars did not have time to go to every little province and every little district and every little area and settle all the disputes and issues. So that's why they had governors in every little province. And then they had kings over several provinces overseeing several governors. And then all of these people, of course, reported to Rome. Now, if you bothered Caesar with one of your cases that you were supposed to settle, because that's why he put you there, and you decided to send somebody from your territory to his territory, then when he got to Rome, he was brought before the Praetorian Prefect, which was like Congress, and the head of the Praetorian Prefect would hear your case. He would confer with all the senators, and they'd do all the legwork and the bookwork for Caesar. And then when you come into court, you didn't get to say much. They just told Caesar what your situation was. This man cometh from a certain area. He's been accused of thus and so, and we found out this, we found out that. Now here, Caesar, make your decision. And it took sometimes less than 30 seconds. Take off his head, or let him go free. Yeah, that's just how it works. He was a dictator. He was a tyrant. But to write the letter was pretty important, because if the letter didn't make sense, if there was flaws in the letter, if Caesar found the letter and found out that there really was no cause for this, then it should have been taken care of back there. Oftentimes, the governor would get a summons, and that summons would be, thou hast been commissioned to come to Rome. And they usually knew what that meant. They got their head cut off because they didn't handle business right. So when King Agrippa walks in to visit with him, because that's his governor under him, Festus says, hey, I've got a problem. I've got a problem. I've got a man here that was in prison. In fact, I inherited him. When I took over this prison, I inherited him. Felix wouldn't let him go. And there were Jews down in Jerusalem that had issues with him. So I told them about Roman law, and I let them come up here, and I let them judge, I let them, cast their accusation. And it was kind of odd. Unlike what I thought I would hear, they kept alleging that a man named Jesus had died, and he kept alleging, no, he's alive. He said, I don't know. And I said, this man's Roman born, and he's appealed to Caesar. And now I've got to write a letter. He said, and Agrippa, I know how smart you are, and I know you can help me out, because I need somewhat to write into my master. So, boy, he's really playing on Agrippa. He said, I want you to help me out. Agrippa said, well, I'd be happy to hear this man myself. He said, tomorrow. at this same time you shall. I wish I had a picture of that, because I suspect, it would be pretty interesting to see. Evidently, there was quite a bit of paint, powder, junk, Avon, and sweet-smelling spices involved that day. It talks about Agrippa and his mighty robe that he wore. It talks about Bernice and all her pomp and splendor, his wife. They came in there, and they sat down beside Festus. Here's all the councilmen and all the high dignitaries, Everybody that's somebody is gathered there that day to hear this little old stoop-shouldered Jew, who possibly can't even see very well, but he had to write with such large letters it might even been his thorn in the flesh. Just to hear this little old prisoner that they've had there for months and months and months. And when Paul would walk in, peer up there to Agrippa, Agrippa would say, "Thou art permitted to speak for thyself." Paul would begin his masterful speech. It's known as Paul before Agrippa. Paul would tell him, my manner of raising from my youth up is well known. And what I'm being judged for today is what we call the hope of the promise, which my forefathers taught, which Moses taught. Moses taught that one was coming that would die for our sins, that he would be resurrected and live again and all of that. And he said, I believe that, and that's why I'm right here before you. But he said, "Oh, Agrippa, what happened to me was I used to be an enemy of the church. And I was on the other side. And I didn't even believe this story. But on the Damascus Road, here's what happened. And I got struck down. And I went, and Ananias said, 'Receive ye the Holy Spirit.' And then he baptized me in water for the remission of my sins. And I was ordained an apostle, as one born out of due order. And I've been preaching Jesus Christ ever since." He said, "Now, does this sound strange to you, O King Agrippa? That our God should raise one from the dead?" Well, about this time, old Festus spoke up. He said, "Paul, you are beside yourself. Much learning doth make thee mad." Now, I will readily admit that I think, with all due respect to education, and I'm not down on education, but I think that in our world today, there's quite a few folks who have done a little too much learning. When you learn so much that you go beyond God, you've learned too much. If you keep God in the picture, no matter how much you learn, you'll realize that He's the author of it all anyway. And it's a blessing to see a highly educated man that also understands that I came from God. That I'd have no power. Remember what Jesus said to Pilate when Pilate said, "I've got the authority to kill you and deliver you," or whatever. And Jesus said, "No, you wouldn't have none at all if it weren't for my thought." It's good to see someone that's got both the education of this world, and then they understand that here's the most noble of all, the education of Christ. I really have yet to find the Christian who has studied too much. They tell me that if you just keep your face between the Bible and just read it, if you just get overboard, that it'll drive you crazy. Well, I've met a lot of crazy people in the church, but none of them was because they studied too much. As a matter of fact, if they'd have studied more, they wouldn't have been so crazy. So I just have yet to meet the man that's doing too much for Jesus, that's just learned too much of the Bible, and it's just messed them up left to right. That just doesn't seem to happen. Paul would sit there just as cool as a cucumber and say, "I'm not man most noble, Festus, but I speak forth the words of truth and soberness." He said, "King Agrippa knows about these things, because these things were not done in corners." Jesus didn't hide. He went right down on Main Street. He went right into the synagogue, right out on the shores of Galilee. He went into every city. Everybody knows what happened. Everybody knows the sun was darkened at high noon. Everybody knows the grave is empty today, in spite of the watch that was put there. This wasn't done in the dark. See, King Agrippa was half Jew. And he knew Jewish customs. Paul said, "I'm glad I can talk to you, Agrippa, because I know you're an expert in these customs. So he said, Agrippa, do you believe the prophets? And old Agrippa just stared at him. So he helped him. He said, I know you. I know you do. And Agrippa said, all books you persuade me to be a Christian. Oh, that's close. Man, I have seen that. I've heard that. I've watched people during the invitation song, which we often sing at the end of our sermons, just to try to encourage people to respond to Jesus, to obey the gospel, to become a Christian. I've seen people get so nervous that sometimes they just turn and walk out. I watched a man hold to the front of the bench one time, and I think he nearly took the varnish off. He just kept going like this. He'd start out in the aisle, he'd come back this way, hustling and wrestling with it, almost persuaded. And in nearly every case, when somebody gets that close, and then they back down, and they say, I'll come back tomorrow night, never see their face again. The danger of procrastination is that it's a habit that's almost impossible to break, and you'll just keep on procrastinating. In fact, those who are waiting for the 11th hour to obey the gospel, they nearly always die at about 10:58. Then it's over. And what they intended to do, they never get done. We have absolutely no record of King Agrippa ever following through on that conviction. In the heat of the moment, under duress and power from Paul's persuasive voice, he said, I'm almost convinced to be a Christian. That's why they went aside. Bernice got up and threw her big old long coat around her, and out the door they went. Agrippa followed, and Festus and all the council. They had a little powwow, and that's when Agrippa said, this man might have been set at liberty had he not appealed unto Caesar. I suspect that may be right. And if Paul had made that decision to just stick it out and just say, no, I won't go to Jerusalem, I'll just stay here in jail. I don't have to. But then again, when you're dealing with politicians and the law, they got you over the barrel. If he'd have said no, old Festus might have said, oh, you defy me? Well, I'll send you down there anyway. Oh! Wouldn't have mattered then what the law said, would it? I suspect he made the right decision. Then the ship came. And when the ship came, a little journey started here in Acts 27th chapter. I want you to notice the first word of this journey as they made their way from Caesarea Philippi to Rome. It says, it was determined that we should sail unto Italy. So they delivered Paul, certain other prisoners, unto one named Junius, the centurion of Augustus' band. It was determined. Yeah, that's because of decision was made. See, everything in life, it's not really everything in life is predestinated, but it's predestinated by our decisions. You're not predestinated to go to hell, but you will if you decide to. See, when you're faced with a decision, if you decide, I'm not even going to make one, I'm just going to be uncommitted. Well, you just made a decision. You decided not to decide. Now you suffer the consequences of the non-decision that you made, and whatever goes along with that. So everything in life is determined. If you want to be predestinated in Christ Jesus, as the book of Ephesians declares, you make a decision to obey the gospel and be named and name the name of Christ and be part of that kingdom. Now you are predestinated in Him. And wherever that church is going where you're going to land, because all the saved are in the church. Not all the church is saved, but all the saved are in the church. And when you're in there, you're predestinated. When you bail out, which is what some people do. I've heard of people jumping out of cars, and even a few bailing out of airplanes. Well, they become a greasy spot down there on the ground. They are predestinated now for death because of the decision they made. You bail out of the church, now you're predestinated again, and that is to destruction. So every decision you make in life is so vital for your future. You kids don't realize this, but what you're eating, the way you're eating right now, the eating habits that you develop, and the stuff that you're stuffing into your stomach is going to really affect you years later. Right now you could eat sawdust and nails for dinner, pour a little syrup on it, it wouldn't hurt you too much, you'd take a few tums and go on. But you keep eating that old slimy packaged food, that old greasy stuff, that old stuff that ain't got no nutrition to it, but there it is, and it's the thing, you know. You keep eating that kind of stuff and hurry along in life, and later on, boy oh boy, you're going to have some problems to deal with. They might even have to take the knife to you and cut out half your gut and half your stomach because of your eating habit. You start drinking that brew from a country of 1,100 springs that just looks so good on that billboard, don't it? But years later, oh, the consequences. You start smoking up cigarettes, just a little cigarette. And now years later, you got a hole here, and you have to put something up here to even talk. Cut off half the side of your face. Leads you to an early death. You start having an affair, committing adultery against your husband or your wife, and you think, oh, it'll be all right. I'll keep it a secret. I won't let anybody know. It's my life. It don't affect nobody but me, even if it's wrong. It's not going to hurt nothing. You just don't realize what kind of effects that's going to have on your kids, your family, anybody you're associated with, who you work for, where you go to school, who you marry, where you go to church, and who you associate with, who you have fellowship with. Man, that decision, those decisions, culminated together, determines your eternal destiny. I mean, really. We look at it as just a day-to-day thing, and we say, well, I'll do this and see how it works out. If it don't work out, I'll change it then. Hey, man, some of these things have such long-reaching effects. There's a reason why I believe that adultery in the Bible is right up there at the top of the list every time. It starts listing the sins, it starts with adultery. It goes on down. And it's not that you'll sink any deeper in the flames of hell for committing adultery than you will if you commit drunkenness or if you commit lying. It says all liars will have their part in the lake of fire. It's not that, this one's so much greater than the other one that, boy, oh boy, you'll be down there about 17 stories down and it'll be 16 times hotter and all that. It's not that. But it's just that adultery has such a long-lasting and far-reaching effects on not only your life, but who you're having an affair with, and who you're married to, and who they're married to, and who your kids are, and who their kids are, and who your family is, and who their family is, and even the church once it comes to life. It just has such a tremendous effect on so many people. Whereas other sins are still sin, but they may not have such long-lasting effects. And they may not reach out there and touch so many other people and hurt so many other people. So the decisions you make, almost on a daily basis, determine where you're going to wind up. If you wind up in hell like the rich man did, you'll realize you made some wrong decisions. You may beg just like he begged and say, Father Abraham, would you send this man back? He said, I got 5 brothers. And they're going to come to this terrible place. And you're going to be told, no, it don't work like Don't that just frustrate you when you try to get something done and they tell you, it don't work like that. That's not how we do it. Well, guess what? Once you've made the decision that condemns your soul and you get paid for it, there is no turning back. Life will not, what life has to offer will not redeem you. I heard a song about 4 or 5 days ago, and that's amazing to me how these things are so impressed in my mind. From years ago, I used to listen to music that I shouldn't have listened to. Maybe it's just my mind. I don't know. Maybe the trash that's up there just doesn't want to filter out. But I walk into a restaurant or a place of business or somebody's home and I hear a song play, a lot of times I think, oh, that's that old song I heard when I was in the 7th grade. That's the old song way back there. I walked into a place the other day and I heard a guitar start to play a new song, and just instantly I thought, I think I know who that guy is. I could just tell when he was playing that guitar. It just had to be John Fogerty. It had to be. Because he used to be my idol, see, when I was a teenager. And when he opened his mouth and started singing, I thought, yep, that's him. He's about 10 years older than me, and he was singing about the mystic highway that he's on, that he hoped would take him home. The highway of life won't take you home. But I think he's starting to think a little bit like a lot of older people start to think when they get toward the end of their way, especially when they start having issues. He said, lately I've been thinking how it's all going to end. After all the flash and thunder, then we're gone with the wind. That's right. When you die, life takes you to the grave, and the angels take you to God. And there you give account of what you did in this life. So how's it all going to end for you? It is determined by the decisions that you make. After they entered into this ship, it says they launched. That's pretty much like life, isn't it? You make a decision, then you launch. Boy, I launched into quite a few things. I tried a lot of different stuff in life. I don't know whether it was just that I had burnout problems or not, but it seemed like I was affected by that. Almost everything I started business-wise, after a few years, I decided, I think I'll sell this and do something else. The enjoyment of building something up, getting it all together was half the fun to me. Once you got it, it was like, this ain't what I thought it was. So I went into several different things in life, you know. I launched time and time again. And that's just how life is. When you do make that decision. You know, like when you say, honey, I think we love each other all right. Why don't we get married? Boy, you're fixing to launch. Oh, buddy. You're making a launch. For the, listen to this now, boys and girls. For the rest of your life. That's the woman. That's the man you're going to have to look at the supper table until you die. Every day. She better be the right one. I'm telling you. If not, there could be some dark days. D-I-V-O-R-C. Yes, sir. After they launched this ship, got on down the way there by Cyprus, and it said the winds were contrary. Well, isn't that the case? Man, you launch out in life and you decide to invest in this or to go this route or to specialize in a certain thing. And then all of a sudden you're saying, what's wrong here? What's going on? This is not what I expected. This is not what I wanted. No, it really isn't. And I tell you what, it's just one of those things, it's one of those unwritten principles of life. Before you make a major decision, whatever it might be, it seems like nobody will warn you of the impending doom that you may be facing. But after you get into it, they'll say, oh yeah, yeah, that's how that is. Oh boy, I could have told you that. But they didn't. No, they didn't. You know, they didn't tell you that you got in the cow business that your cows would get out all the time, did they? No, they didn't tell you that. It's like, oh yeah, you have about 100 head of cows, you can make about so much a year. But they didn't tell you about all the black leg and pink eye and all that stuff, did they? You go into business and nobody talks about how tough it is to get all the permits and to get approved and do all this stuff, you know, and how, well, you know, you may bid $300,000 on that job, but you're only going to make about $40,000 when it's all said and done. Is that all? Yeah. Well, where'd all the profit go? Well, you know, there's this thing called miscellaneous. You know, it slips in there. They don't tell you about all that until afterwards, and they say, oh yeah, it's a struggle. You just barely keep your head above water. But when you start it, they say, good luck. Wish you well. Yeah. There's a lot of contrary winds in life. And what those contrary winds do to your little ship of life is they blow you off course. You intended to go the straightest point between point A and point B, but instead you veered off and wound up way down here at Z. And you had to come back this way, and man, it took 3 extra days. It cost $5,000 more. It gave you a headache. You wound up in the hospital. Contrary winds. Such is life. And the Apostle Paul was wise enough to know that this ship had launched a little too late in the year. As a matter of fact, he said, due to the fact that the fast has already passed, and he's just making a reference on the calendar there, he said that past that day right there, generally ships don't sail. So he warned the centurion, we better park this ship. We better find the coal somewhere, and we better winter until the storms subside and we have better sailing. But you know, the owner of that, it says the owner and the master of the ship persuaded the centurion to listen to him rather than to listen to Paul. Now that owner was pushing it for all he could do to get there. You know, he didn't get paid till he got there. And to have to stop somewhere for 3 or 4 months in winter, that was costly. So he was pushing the envelope. Let's make it, let's make it. We can do it, we can do it. And I imagine the centurion kind of thought, I'd like to get home myself. See who you listen to. Oh, the decision you make as to who you listen to. Well, that'll change everything in life. There's an old saying, never ask a tire salesman if you need new tires. Of course you do. He's a tire salesman. You may have 50% tread, but that's all right. We can use those tires, so we'll give you a trade-in. We'll pay you for them, and we'll put new tires on your car, and you'll get road hazard warranty. You won't have as many flats. Your wife will be a whole lot safer. And when it's all said and done, it's a better deal for you to trade now than to wait till you wear them out. So don't ever ask a tire salesman if you need tires. You know what he's going to say. So when you're wanting to justify something shady in your life that nature itself tells you, I really shouldn't do this, or your conscience says, I know what the Bible says about that. I know what Grandpa taught me. I know what the preacher said and they proved it, but I'm kind of wanting to change. Yeah. Whenever people decide they don't like our simple worship, as we try to worship just like the ordinances were delivered, they don't come ask a preacher that preaches for the loyal Church of Christ. They go to the liberal one who's taken in the innovations and they say, now, what's your justification for the cups you have and the music you to the Sunday school? And they talk to you and you say, well, that sounds pretty good. Yeah. When people decide that they want to leave their companion and marry another, even though you know your Bible says you're bound by the law as long as your companion liveth, so that if while they liveth you be married to another, you shall be called an adulterer. Well, they decide they want to change that situation and marry somebody else. They never go to a preacher that they know will tell them, no, the Bible don't say that. They hunt that preacher up, and I'm telling you, they can smell him out just like a coon dog can smell a coon. And they'll go directly to those preachers and they'll say, is it all right for me to get divorced because here's what's happened in my marriage? And that preacher will say, yeah, under those circumstances you can. Who you listen to and pay heed has so much to do with where you'll wind up, what your final destination will be. It's awful hard to end right if you don't start right. And the odd thing about this was that when they listened to the owner and the master of the ship rather than to Paul, it seemed like all was well. Just like in life, it says that the south winds began to blow softly, and they, supposing that all things were well, they just took out right in the middle of the sea. You make a bad decision, you know, like maybe you younger boys and girls will say, well, I know Mom and Daddy told me not to do this, but I'm going to try it. You try it and you think, this ain't too bad. Man, I thought, you know, the sky would fall on me if I did this. I thought the world, it's not bad. Why, look at here. Yeah, but your Mom and Dad knew what would happen later on. See, folks, I'm getting kind of tired of this philosophy in the church today. But I think it's wrong. This philosophy that says, unless it's specifically named in the Bible, it's got to be specifically named. And if it's not, don't kill me for it. It ain't wrong. I'll have you know there's a bunch of ungodly, diabolical, sinful things that are not specifically named in that word right there. But there's a whole bunch of such likes. You look at those 17 works of the flesh, and it says, and such like. That means anything that even leads to that, even makes you think about that, or start going that way. That's the problem with the wrong decision. It may not have too many consequences right now, but later on down the way. I'll guarantee you that old boy that's laying there on the street right now, he's got clothes on that haven't been washed in probably 6 months or so. And he's got an old empty Everclear bottle right beside him. He's sleeping on the sidewalk and people are stepping over him. He had a mother at one time that picked him up as a little fresh baby boy. And she had great dreams and great aspirations for him. And he decided, though, somewhere down the line, I don't know where, but he was born just as pure and sweet as heaven itself, but somewhere down the line, somebody handed him an old cold beer, and he took a swig. Just one sip. What could that hurt? Well, it didn't. But then he took a second. And now, look where he is. That guy that sits there night after night in that old dark room, and he watches all the grody movies and all the violence, and he sees all the killing and all that stuff. And then later on, 20, 30 years later, he kills his neighbor, or he robs a bank. And he says, well, I kind of got this idea off TV when I was a kid, you know. See there, the seed was planted way down here. Now here's the result. You sow the wind, and you reap the whirlwind over here, you see. Things look smooth a lot of times in life. The way even seems right unto man, Solomon said. But the end thereof are the ways of death. But you know, after that little ship got tossed to and fro and broken up and everything else, Paul said, and I don't often like to say I told you so, but he seemed to said that. He said, you should have listened to me. It never loosed from Crete. You should have listened to me, folks. And I think they did. They did listen because he said, God is with me. And God told me that you must stand before Caesar. So in order to make it, folks, here's what they had to do. And we have gone through this thing pretty quickly here. But in order for this little ship of life that we're comparing this to, in order for it to make it to its final destination, verse 38 of Acts 27 says, they lightened the ship even cast out the thief. If you intend to make heaven your home, you cannot carry all your baggage with you. There's no place and no room for sin in heaven. That's a perfect place. You can't bring the lustful things of this old world into there. You know, when all desperation sets in and it's a matter of life or death, and you say, you know what, this ship's about to sink. You will even throw away the food, if necessary, to lighten that ship enough to get there, because that's the ultimate goal. That's what matters. Folks, that's why there is no sacrifice too big to discount heaven. There is nothing that you have to give up that you will regret. You walk across the threshold into the gold-paved city of Jerusalem. You won't regret. I went to the baseball training camp when I was about 16, 17 years old. I thought I was a superstar when I was a kid. Because some of the coaches said, oh boy, you got it, boy, you got it. If the radar gun was right, I was throwing about 94.7 miles an hour. They said, boy, you can pitch in the majors. So I went to a little farm league tryout thing the Astros had. It was right after they were the Colt 45. Y'all remember that? Showing my age. And boy, oh boy, it was amazing. Everybody else could throw that fast too, or faster. And there was guys there that could hit that ball. Didn't matter how much spit you put on it. Didn't have any. You know, I had a slider. I had a wicked curve. I had a change up that make them swing twice before the ball got to them. And I thought I was unstoppable. But they told me they'd call me if they wanted me. That's the best thing ever happened to me. It made me realize that my only hope for stardom, I knew I'd never be a Hollywood actor. I knew I couldn't sing worth the flip, so I sure wasn't going to be on the Grand Ole Uproar. I wasn't big enough, strong enough to play football. I didn't have enough education. I was a high school dropout, so I sure couldn't make it in the big educated world, so I thought, baseball is my ticket to glory. And then they told me, we'll call you if we want you. I'm so glad. If I'd have been a star, like all young boys want to be, if I'd have been a star, and I'd have made the millions, and I'd have had all the wine and all the song and all the women, I might be a household name today, and I might be on the front of a lot of magazines, and who knows, I might even made it on the Parsons show or whoever's doing it now, Leno or whoever. My name has never been written in this gospel. What you have in Christ, according to Jesus, is worth more than if you own the whole world. What shall a man give, he said, in exchange for his soul? They lightened the ship. Here's what happened, verse 41. Falling into a place where two seas met, the ship ran aground. Yes, sir. Sea of life and the sea of eternity are running just like this. And one day they're going to intersect. And when the sea of life meets the sea of eternity, it's over. Nothing but the eternal world lays in front of you. Can you go back? majorly important that you understand tonight that your decisions control your destiny. Maybe you need to lighten the load. And I'm not talking necessarily about the money you got in the bank, which may be your biggest problem. Maybe it's your God. But if so, lighten the load. That's what the Lord told a man one time. Sell what you have, give to the poor. Because he knew that's where his God was. But I'm not thinking that's the problem here. You know, there might be some jealousy that needs to be unloaded. Some envy. Some hatred. I've learned something about hatred and envy and jealousy. I've learned that they give results. I mean, they give results that sometimes fast. But love does too. Love gets results too. And the results that love brings about is both good for you and me. It'll help us both get to heaven. Hatred, jealousy, envy. Now it hurts us. Maybe that's a load you need to lighten up. Oh, how long of a list could we make here if we just went here? I've held you long enough. There's some of you in here, folks, whose ship has sailed for quite a while. You've been on this old journey for quite some time. And I think one of the most impressive things that I have ever witnessed throughout the brotherhood as I went across it is how many people we've had who have put their hand to the plow, and they have plowed almost all the way across the field. And you get to where, when you're plowing, you get to where what you call that last round. There's one more round to make, and I'll be through. And they lay down their sword and quit. Boy, that's sad. That you would discard all this time of service in the kingdom. All the treasures that you've laid up and just come that close to the end, and then just give it up. It is not worth it, folks. We've come too far. There's too much to gain to lose. It just isn't worth it. Your decisions determine your eternal destiny. Have I said that? So if you're here tonight, and if there is any sin here, you know, I'm looking at what? 50, 60 people. If God was to ask me, Malcolm, what do you think about these people? Give me your judgment, Malcolm. What do you think? Or, you know, I don't know you. I don't tap your phone. I don't read your name. I don't follow you down the street. I'm not one of those guys that looks you up on the computer, see if I can find anything bad about you. If it is, I don't even want to go. But I dare say, as good as I think you are, and as far as I'm concerned, you'll all be. But I dare say there's not any single. And if there is something in your life, folks, and you know I don't. I think about that old song my grandpa used to sing about the rock and the weary land. And it went like this: there is a rock in the weary land, whose shadows fall on the burning sand, inviting pilgrims as they pass to take a shade in the wilderness. Then why will you die? Why will you die? When the sheltering rock is so nearby, then why